The world did not realize it was standing at the edge of a profound rupture. In the closing days of August 1939, much of Europe still moved with the familiar rhythm of late summer. Cafes were busy. Newspapers debated diplomacy and politics. Children played in streets that had survived one devastating war and were widely believed to be safe from another. The memory of the First World War remained vivid, and for many, it seemed unimaginable that such destruction could happen again. Yet history is not guided by memory alone. Sometimes the forces that shape events gather quietly, until they can no longer be contained. At dawn on September 1, 1939, German forces crossed into Poland. The attack was swift, coordinated, and unlike anything many observers had seen before. Armored divisions advanced rapidly while aircraft struck transportation hubs, communication lines, and military positions. The method would later be known as Blitzkrieg, lightning war, and it demonstrated a new level of speed and integration in modern combat. Within days, Britain and France declared war on Germany. What had begun as a regional crisis quickly escalated into a global conflict. Poland resisted, but it faced invasion from two directions. German forces pressed from the west, while Soviet forces entered from the east under a secret agreement. By October, Poland had been divided and occupied. Its government fled into exile, and its population endured years of hardship under foreign control. On the Western Front, however, the expected large-scale fighting did not immediately materialize. For several months, armies waited, fortified their positions, and prepared. This uneasy pause became known as the Phoney War, a period marked less by action than by anticipation. The calm ended in the spring of 1940. German forces launched a series of rapid offensives across northern and western Europe. Denmark fell quickly. Norway followed after determined resistance in difficult terrain. Soon afterward, the Netherlands and Belgium were overrun. German armored units advanced through the Ardennes, a region long considered an unlikely route for a major attack. By moving through this unexpected corridor, they bypassed France's strongest defenses and drove toward the English Channel. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers were soon trapped near the coastal town of Dunkirk. With enemy forces closing in, evacuation appeared unlikely. Yet a vast and improvised rescue effort, made up of naval vessels and civilian boats, crossed the channel repeatedly. Over several days, large numbers of troops were brought to safety. It was an extraordinary withdrawal, but it left much of Western Europe under German control. France fell soon afterward. Paris was occupied, and one of Europe's most influential powers was removed from the fight. Britain now stood largely alone against Germany. In the summer of 1940, the war shifted into the air. The Battle of Britain became the first major campaign fought, primarily by opposing air forces. German aircraft targeted airfields, industry, and cities in an effort to force Britain to surrender. British pilots, supported by radar technology and a coordinated defense system, managed to hold off the assault. Despite sustained bombing during what became known as the Blitz, Britain remained in the war. The conflict had expanded beyond traditional battlefields. Civilians, industries, and infrastructure were now deeply involved. War was no longer confined to soldiers alone. In June 1941, Germany launched its largest campaign yet, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa stretched across a vast front, bringing millions of soldiers into combat. Early German advances captured enormous territories and large numbers of prisoners. But the scale of the land, supply challenges, and determined Soviet resistance gradually slowed the offensive. Cities became symbols of endurance. Leningrad faced a prolonged siege marked by extreme hardship. Moscow held under immense pressure. And in 1942, the battle for Stalingrad began. Stalingrad became one of the defining struggles of the war. Fighting unfolded across factories, streets, and apartment blocks, with both sides determined to hold their ground. Harsh winter conditions added to the difficulty. Eventually, Soviet forces surrounded the German army. In early 1943, it surrendered. The outcome marked a decisive turning point, shifting momentum on the Eastern Front. Even as the fighting intensified in Europe, the war widened elsewhere. On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, severely damaging the United States Pacific Fleet. The attack brought the United States fully into the war. Conflict rapidly spread across Asia and the Pacific, as Japan captured large areas including the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and territories throughout Southeast Asia. The Pacific War unfolded largely at sea and across remote islands. Aircraft carriers became central to naval strategy, replacing battleships as the dominant force. In 1942, the Battle of Midway dealt a major blow to Japanese naval strength. From that point forward, Allied forces began advancing across the Pacific, using a strategy of capturing key islands while isolating others. Battles such as Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were long and difficult, fought under demanding conditions. Meanwhile, in North Africa, British and later American forces engaged German and Italian troops across vast desert landscapes. Control shifted several times before Axis forces were defeated in Tunisia in 1943. The Allies then moved into Italy, launching a campaign that slowly pushed northward through challenging terrain. Although Italy's government collapsed, German forces continued to resist, prolonging the fighting there. By 1944, Allied leaders prepared for a return to Western Europe. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied forces crossed the English Channel and landed in Normandy. Airborne units arrived ahead of the main landings, while troops came ashore along heavily defended beaches. Establishing a foothold required immense coordination and sacrifice. Once secured, it allowed Allied forces to move inland and begin the liberation of France. As Allied armies advanced, they encountered evidence of systematic persecution and mass imprisonment, carried out under Nazi rule. The discovery of concentration and extermination camps revealed the full scale of the Holocaust, in which millions of Jews and others had been killed. These revelations profoundly shocked the world and underscored the moral dimensions of the conflict. By early 1945, Germany was under pressure from both east and west. Soviet forces advanced toward Berlin while Allied troops crossed into Western Germany. Years of bombing and combat had left many cities heavily damaged. Infrastructure failed, and civilian populations were displaced on a massive scale. In April 1945, Soviet troops entered Berlin after intense fighting. Adolf Hitler died there as the city fell. Germany surrendered in May 1945, bringing the war in Europe to an end. The conflict in the Pacific, however, continued. Japan's leadership showed little willingness to surrender despite mounting losses. Allied planners feared that an invasion of the Japanese mainland would result in enormous casualties. A new and powerful weapon, developed in secret, presented another option. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was unprecedented and introduced the world to nuclear warfare. Within days, Japan announced its surrender. The Second World War had come to a close. Its end did not mean a return to the world that had existed before. 1939. The war had reshaped nations, economies, and societies on a global scale. Tens of millions of people had died. Cities had been rebuilt from ruins. Borders were redrawn. Old empires weakened, while new powers emerged. Efforts to prevent future global conflict led to the creation of the United Nations. War crimes trials established new principles of international accountability. Scientific and technological developments, made during wartime, began influencing civilian life. Advances in aviation, medicine, computing, and engineering would shape the decades to come. At the same time, tensions between former allies gave rise to a new geopolitical rivalry known as the Cold War. Nuclear weapons introduced a lasting awareness of how destructive modern conflict could become. Across Asia and Africa, movements for independence gained momentum as colonial systems lost strength. The balance of global power shifted in ways that continue to influence international relations. Culturally and intellectually, the war left a deep imprint. Writers, artists, and thinkers wrestled with questions about responsibility, memory, and the nature of progress. The phrase "never again" captured both a hope and a challenge for future generations. World War II was more than a series of military campaigns. It mobilized entire societies. It transformed industry, science, and daily life. It blurred the boundaries between battlefield and home front, between technological achievement and moral responsibility. Before 1939, many believed progress would naturally lead to a better world. After 1945, progress was seen as something that required careful stewardship. The conflict forced humanity to confront both its capacity for cooperation and its capacity for destruction. The modern international system, many of today's technologies, and the structures of global diplomacy all carry traces of decisions made during those 6 years. The generation that lived through the war witnessed extremes of hardship and resilience that would shape how the world rebuilt itself. The story of 1939 to 1945 is not only a record of what happened, it is a reminder of how profoundly human choices can alter the course of history. The war was not inevitable. It was the result of actions taken, alliances formed, and decisions made over time. And that is why its legacy continues to matter. Because the responsibility for the future, as it was then, remains in human hands.